Hello everyone, I'm Richard Sortomme. Today I'm going to resume my composing studio tour with a discussion and demonstration on how I composed my piano concerto, which received its world premiere a little over 2 years ago in February of 2020. In November of 2018, the wonderful American pianist Pamela Mia Paul commissioned me to write a piano concerto. Writing a work like this, a piano concerto, with a particular soloist in mind is not only interesting, but it's a fascinating process. So please let me share with you a little bit about what that means. I have known Pamela since high school days, and we have played many recitals and countless chamber music performances. For those of you who saw my previous video, you might recall that I did graduate Juilliard as a concert violinist. I know all of Pamela's superb interpretive gifts for colors and textures, so it was incumbent upon me to include as many of these as possible in the concerto. At the inception, it is also paramount to take into account what kind of ensemble would be performing with the piano soloist. Would it be a symphony orchestra, a chamber orchestra, a string orchestra? Well, in this case, it was to be a wind symphony. Now, for those of you who are not exactly sure what that means, it incorporates an entire woodwind section with a saxophone quartet and contrabass clarinet, an entire brass section, including euphonium, timpani, percussion battery, harp, and 2 lonely double basses. Except for the 2 basses, there would be no string section. Now, for me, this was a first, and at the beginning of the process, quite intimidating, because as a former string player, I felt that some of my strongest abilities were writing for the strings. The full emotional palette, the power and sensitivity of a string section is truly amazing. So my first big important job was to sit down and think deeply about how I could recreate those qualities without them. Another important point to discuss here is the subject of musical ideas. A good or better than good musical idea is at the heart and soul of every composer. They don't present themselves necessarily while you're sitting in front of the piano with a pencil and score paper at hand. They can present themselves to you while you're walking down the street, while you're making a good risotto, while you're combing your hair. But a musical idea is a musical idea. As important as they are, however, development, the act of developing a musical idea might actually be more important. By that, please consider the following. A fine composer should be able to develop, to change, to alter, to lengthen, to transform anything. A 3-note chord, a 4-note melody, a short burst of repeated notes, even a contrapuntal figure. In essence, any musical idea. This is a must, an imperative, at the very core of fine composing. To dig down on that a little deeper, I'd like to quote the truly great French composer Maurice Ravel from his 1931 program notes regarding his own piano concerto. Quote, "The G major concerto took 2 years of work, you know. The opening theme came to me on a train between Oxford and London, but the initial idea is nothing. The work of chiseling then began. We've gone past the days when the composer was thought of as being struck by inspiration, feverishly scribbling down his thoughts on a scrap of paper. Writing music is 75% an intellectual process." Unquote. Wow, that's a powerful statement, and one that might surprise many of you. But please keep in mind that Ravel is generally accepted to have been the greatest orchestrator of any composer. So let's get to it. Those 3 notes are what started my entire composing process. B flat, A, G sharp. They don't sound like much, I get it. And I don't know where they came from. I don't care where they came from. I don't ask a whole lot of questions when I compose. Ravel said composing is 75% an intellectual process, and I think he's right. But your intuition and your gut feelings also come into play. And when I compose, I rely on my instincts, and I won't sign off on an idea until I feel that it's great in my gut. So I've got these 3 notes, and I have to do something with them. So this is, if you look at my sketch here, up at the top, this is the first thing that came out. Okay, that's good. It's got some feeling to it. I like the chord in the second bar, but my instincts say it's not good enough. So I decided I want to go back to the original register of these 3 notes. And if you look at my second sketch, and by the way, sketches are not actual bars of music. They're instructions. Yes, I write down notes, but it's in my musical shorthand, which I, of course, understand. So here I decided to play the 3 notes as a chord. And then I decided, for some reason, to add 3 notes an octave higher. So I have a 6-note chord. So if you go over to the finished piano part, I'm now going to play bar 1 in my wonderful music software, Logic Pro 10. Now I'm going to play the video from the live world premiere performance with Pamela playing bar 1 into bar 2. I'm sure all of you noticed the incredibly better sound on this video than what came out of my computer. This is because, first of all, you have a wonderful artist playing a real Steinway grand piano in a concert hall. And she's adding interpretive touches. She's playing it a little slower than I had envisioned, with just very sensitive touches. Now, Logic Pro 10 is an incredibly powerful music software application, and it's a tool that every composer probably needs to use. But you always have to keep in mind that it will never, a performance from a computer will never replace that of a wonderful artist. In the first excerpt at bar 1, I used these 3 notes in 6-note chords. In bar 2, on beat 3, I'm going back to individual notes, but not up here, much lower. And if you go to my sketch, you'll see where I wrote in these quintuplet 16th note figures, fast, fleeting, double piano, very soft. You'll hear in the right hand, in the 5 notes, and in the left hand. So let's go over to Logic, and I'm going to play those notes, that bar, much slower tempo. Now I'm going to play it up to tempo. And now we'll go back to the video and watch Pamela play bars 1 and bar 2. What I want to point out here is in that bar 2, those fast notes, the interpretive power of a performer. In this case, Pamela. She uses the sustain pedal, which is sort of like using echo or reverb in a recording studio, to add atmosphere to those fast 16th notes. It adds this gossamer quality, which I really love. This excerpt that we're going to play now occurs about a minute later in the piano introduction. And I developed these three notes again in a separate fashion, but they're not as fast as I used them before. Their use is somewhere between as a melody and in a virtuoso passage. If you look at the piano score, you'll see that I use them both in a descending fashion and ascending. So the piano hands, right and left, are in octaves, and I'm going to play it in logic now. And here we'll go back to the video of the premiere performance. Okay, this might, of all the examples we've played so far, might demonstrate the most dramatic difference between the music coming out of Logic Pro on my computer and Pamela playing. And this gets to the heart of something very important for me. When I write a concerto for a soloist whom I respect greatly, such as Pamela, I like her ideas. Now, I don't want her changing the actual notes unless we talk about it, but things like tempo and dynamics, she might have a different take on it. And that's what I like. In this case, she envisioned this passage, these 4 bars, starting a little bit more robustly. So she played it a little bit, up in volume than I had in my computer. And she also added rhythmic interpretation. By that, I mean the computer plays dee da 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 dee da dee da dee da da da, where Pamela plays dee da dee da dee da dee da dee da dee da 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 da. She starts slower, she gains in tempo, and by the end, it's a virtuoso passage. The first 3 examples have involved only the unaccompanied solo piano in the introduction, which lasts a little under 2 minutes. In the classical and romantic periods, almost all concertos began with an orchestral tutti in which the composer advanced numerous ideas that you would hear later in the solo, whether it be a piano or a violin or a cello. I'm not exactly sure why I chose to begin my concerto with an unaccompanied introduction, except for the fact that I think I wanted my musical ideas, those 2 or 3 ideas, to just stand out on their own, so it would be easy for you to pick them out as a listener later on in the work. This example of the 3 notes it's not chords, but it's in octaves in the right hand, and it's more like a gentle melody. There is orchestration here also for flutes, clarinets, including contrabass clarinet, and the gentle use of soft percussion bells. But before that, look at the piano part, please, and I'll play it in Logic. And here we go again, back to the video. Two quick points I want to bring up here. First, I'm sure you heard the first flute playing along in the melody with Pamela. This is a common technique that many composers use where an instrument in the ensemble doubles the melody in the solo instrument. In this case, she is playing the lowest of the 2 notes in Pamela's octaves in her right hand. The other is the importance of a conductor, and this is the first time we've had a chance to see it. As this phrase ends, Pamela makes a retard. She slows down, And you can see our conductor, Daniel Cook, turn and actually, like he's listening harder and watching her hands as he conducts this retard. If he's not dead on with her, the ensemble will not be together. Much later in the work, in fact 10 minutes later, is a very different use, an extremely dramatic treatment of these three notes. It starts very high with the piano in octaves, very fast, and the third iteration of it is slower. So I will play it for you in Logic as you look at the score. As you watch the upcoming video, you'll notice that this is a major interruption into the flow of the composition. Pamela and the Wind Symphony are roaring, they're playing along wildly, and then Pamela drops out, and for 3 bars, the Wind Symphony continues to play. However, each bar, a few instruments drop out, and they make a diminuendo, they get softer, so by the very last bar, the last thing you hear is this one percussion part. And then, bam! Pamela makes 3 rude interruptions. Then she starts to play again in a very sparse manner with a few percussion instruments to regain the flow of the concerto. I have to admit that during the premiere performance, this interruption caught a lot of the audience off guard, which was kind of neat. It was my goal from the beginning. Here we have the video performance. Just very briefly again, the importance of the conductor cannot be overestimated here. When the flow starts up again, it's a sparse part that Pamela is playing with a complex rhythm, and there are only 2 percussion players playing with her, so there's no real flow again. And unless you have a very strong conductor to nail the tempo that Pamela's playing in, the ensemble is not going to be together. And only 3 bars later in the composition is a much different use, again, of the 3 notes. It's a tender use in a melody. If you look at my piano score, you can see that the 3 notes are used as an upbeat in this melody, ascending, and then they are descending. This is a sweet melody, medium tempo, and I'll play it for you in Logic while you watch the score. As you will see in the upcoming video, this is a very small orchestration. In fact, it has 1 instrument only, alto flute. So this is a duet between Pamela and the alto flute, and you'll hear that the alto flute is playing those 3 notes, sometimes descending, sometimes ascending, sometimes at the same note with Pamela, and sometimes in harmony. Here's the video. There's something really interesting here. It is that the young woman who's playing the alto flute is actually the second flutist in the Wind Symphony. She has played her normal flute before, but the alto flute has been sitting on a stand next to her in an air-conditioned concert hall for 17 minutes, which means that the instrument is cold. So it's a testament to this young woman that she played so beautifully and so in tune. And the only reason that happened is because a couple of minutes before she came in for this duet with Pamela, she picked up the flute and silently blew warm air through the column of the flute. If she had not done that, not warmed it up, it would have been cold and sounded significantly flat or out of tune. I don't know if I've mentioned it to you before, but my entire concerto has a length of somewhere between 22 and 23 minutes. This final example of my development of three notes occurs near the end at the Coda. Here it's a highly rhythmic, even bombastic use of the three notes as the piano soloist and the Wind Symphony race to the conclusion. From the Coda to the end is about 3 minutes, but I'm not going to play all of that here. I'm just going to play a few bars for you to get the idea. Now, this figure, these three notes, the original would sound like this. But my twist to it here in the Coda is, in other words, half step up, whole step up, half step down. This is how I freely developed this three-note figure. And here it is in Logic, a little slower. And here it is, up to tempo. Before we start the video, I just want to point out that my orchestration here is very developed. I basically am using every instrument in the Wind Symphony. Of course, not all at the same time, because even in 3 minutes, there's ebbs and flow. It gets softer, it gets less dense, and then it grows again. But by the end of the concerto, I will have used every instrument in the Wind Symphony, including the entire percussion section. Here's the video, the live performance. So, I have just guided you through a tour of the composing process of various parts of my piano concerto. This video has been dedicated to exploring the use and development of only three notes. However, those three notes are by far not the totality of my concerto. Much like a novel which has many characters, up to this point you have only been introduced to my main musical character, those three notes. You haven't heard the first theme. You haven't heard the second theme, nor how I develop both. In the case of the second theme, I chose to develop it for saxophone quartet, bassoons, contrabassoon, and contrabass clarinet. But don't worry, there will be many more examples and how I develop them in subsequent videos to come. But there is something important I want to bring up here, something that I think we all need to keep in mind. When listening to a performance of any work, one should not notice, identify, or evaluate the techniques that a composer used to craft his or her work. Instead, just sit back, be absorbed in the music, let it wash over you. All of those fancy techniques are still there. It's just that they're invisible, in the background, lurking around, contributing to the fabric of the composition and your enjoyment of it. I hope all of you will visit my website, richardsortomme.com, and on the home page, click the Watch Now button to see and hear the complete video of the world premiere performance with, of course, Pamela Mia Paul as the piano soloist with the University of North Texas Wind Symphony conducted by Daniel Cook. Until then, this is Richard Sortomme saying thanks for stopping by. I hope you'll join me next time and have a great day.